Veteran on the Move, episode number 16. Welcome to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you're a transitioning veteran, an entrepreneur wannabe, or someone who's still stuck in that job trying to escape, this podcast is dedicated to your success. So welcome aboard, sit back, and enjoy the ride. If you're a blogger, artist, musician, or filmmaker who needs legal advice, if you want to know how to protect yourself from legal liability for your website, if you've been accused of copyright or trademark infringement, or you plan on starting a new media-related business or nonprofit organization, if you have any questions about social media and the law, then you're going to want to listen to this episode, because today we're talking to New Media Rights, legal help for independent creators and entrepreneurs. Okay, Terry Karabanek from New Media Rights, who's a staff attorney, is joining us on the show today. How you doing, Terry?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me on the show, Joe.
All right. Yeah. Great to have you, and really excited to talk about this, because I know that I even know of some, me not personally, but I know some people that are having some online media and legal issues with a lot of businesses that may not even be an online business. Most any business nowadays, even your brick and mortar type stores, at least have some type of online presence, or almost have to have an online presence. What are you guys finding out? Is there a common theme, or is there a couple? Is there a top three issues or legal issues that folks are having out there? What are you seeing the most of?
So we do help a variety of folks and creators and internet users. I'd say for the people in e-commerce or starting small businesses, the most common things we see are creating terms of use and privacy policies, which are an integral part of any website. And in fact, if you are an e-commerce website in California, you absolutely do need to have one by law. And privacy policies are just a really great idea, since we see so many websites and technologies really struggling to figure out how to protect user privacy while they're off innovating and doing some really awesome stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So that's essentially website related, or at least even data collection. If your users on your website or people join your website, you actually have to take measures to protect that information and make sure that they're in agreement if they're on your site and using it, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the general rule of thumb for privacy policies is never promise what you can't deliver. It's the sites that overpromise. So you've probably heard of Snapchat. One of the things they promised their users was that all of the photos would be deleted. It turns out all of the photos weren't deleted, despite the fact that they expressly said so in their privacy policy. Now, I don't mean to call Snapchat out, but yes, that's a classic example of don't promise things that you cannot deliver on.
Yeah, well, I remember hearing when Snapchat first came out, and they had said that, or people were telling me how it worked. I'm like, oh yeah, it gets to yeah, right. You know how that goes, especially when you're talking about the internet. It's always there somewhere.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge challenge. And we see it on the legal side that sometimes there's a disconnect between the technology folks and the legal team. And what we really focus on at New Media Rights is coming in and helping to not necessarily solve that disconnect, but really write privacy policies that focus in on not promising something a company just cannot deliver.
And for online businesses just starting out, it's probably best to have something that says, don't expect much from me. I'm not guaranteeing that your stuff isn't going to get out, because I'm fairly new and don't really have much of a technology team. So use at your own risk. I mean, is that essentially what we're talking about?
In many cases, yes. I think it's much easier for larger companies. Like, you'll notice Twitter has a particularly short privacy policy, but they also have some of the best privacy attorneys in the business. They have a focused privacy team that does nothing but focus on user privacy. Most small companies don't have that luxury. So while they love to make promises like Twitter does, or like some other companies with big privacy teams, it's not feasible. So unfortunately, the way the law is set up right now, you tend to be much better off disclaiming everything and just saying, look, we're a small site, we can't necessarily promise anything, than promising, then writing a privacy policy that maybe more speaks to your ideals, but maybe doesn't speak to where you are at as a site technologically yet.
Uh-huh. And I would imagine your average user out there, when those privacy policies pop up or you got to click here in order to join, I mean, probably nobody ever even reads the things. It's just if a lawsuit ever occurs and you have something there that, hey, you did agree to it when you signed up. So, we are protected.
Yes. Yeah, it is true. Most users don't read them, but it's better to be safe than sorry. It's almost like, how in airplanes they have life vests if there's a emergency water landing. Most of the time, those life vests never come into play, but if there's a water landing, you're really going to want that life vest.
Yeah, you hope it never does, but just in case, you're going to want to have it. So that's the way for anybody that's hosting a website, just to protect them if something does go wrong for one of the users. What are some of the other things that New Media Rights is helping folks in the online world with?
So we often help folks, especially that have businesses, help ensure that they know who owns what. And by this, I mean to say a lot of times when you're starting an online business, you might hire a graphic designer, a filmmaker, interns, maybe coders, independent contractors, all of these people that are helping to create content or stuff for your website or business. Oftentimes, if you don't have any written contracts, the default can be whoever created it owns it. So we really help businesses navigate those tricky elements of the law and make sure that they own what they want to in the course of their business. That if they get a logo designed, a graphic designer can't come back later and say, well, actually, I own that logo and you can't use it anymore, and now you have to change your entire business model. Or maybe it's
Okay, well, hey, since you just mentioned logo, let me see if I can get some free legal advice. If I go in,
I unfortunately cannot give legal advice on a podcast for a variety of reasons.
Okay, let's just say somebody uses Elance. Now, I know Elance, which I believe is bought by Odesk, and so now they're the same thing. But I believe in Elance, in part of their user agreement, is if a designer designs a logo or something for the person that hires them, once the transaction is complete and the designer gets paid and the logo gets turned over to the individual, at that point it does become the property of the individual. But that's because they've obviously protected themselves with the legalities of it, because that's how their user agreements are set up. So the designer ahead of time agrees to it, and the person looking to hire the designer agrees to the terms, and so everything's all good, right?
I'm not familiar with that website offhand, so I can't speak to its terms, but I'd say in general, if a website like that were to set itself up and have some sort of agreement that basically says, if you're designing a piece for someone, they own it. You don't own it at the end of the transaction. Now, I can't speak to the effectiveness of their agreements, since it is easy to make mistakes in writing these agreements. But in theory, I'd say that's an excellent business decision and a really good way of helping your customers navigate these complicated legal issues that, to be honest, a lot of small businesses don't think about.
Right. Small businesses are just concentrating on increasing the bottom line or getting in the black on the balance sheet, or just getting started, and they're busy enough with day-to-day operations. The last thing they want to deal with is legal issues, especially after they've already happened.
Exactly. And that's really why we're here as an organization. We take a very preventative approach. We like to prevent problems before they happen, since the reality is having a simple contract up front can often solve problems that would require litigation, that could be so harmful to a business they would essentially cause the business to go out of business.
Yeah, so that's one of those things, kind of like accounting. And unfortunately, people don't want to spend money on the legal issues up front. They just hope nothing happens.
Mhm.
But it's much cheaper to deal with it up front and protect yourself as you go along than waiting until something goes wrong.
Yes, yeah, I think that's it's not just a good principle for business and law. I think it's a good principle for life. If you're getting into something where there is a degree of risk, try to mitigate that risk before you go off and do something that has a risk that could possibly have consequences that you'd rather not face.
Yeah, and so what are some of the other things that you're seeing that seem to be fairly common once you get past user agreements and the copyright stuff?
Once you get past user agreements and the copyright stuff, you actually, I hate to come back to copyright so quickly, but copyright is one of the things we see websites struggle with, especially user generated content sites. So the people who want to be the next Facebook or the next Twitter or the next Instagram, really struggling with how to handle users uploading content. So there's this law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and it actually does provide some protections to user generated content websites, but only if they take certain steps, again, at the beginning of their site to ensure that they have a notice and takedown procedure, that they have a registered agent, a registered DMC agent, so someone to receive all of these potential complaints. And that's something that we help small sites like that starting out with quite often.
And what are some of the issues that occur if you have a user generated site? What actually are the issues that come up? The users that generated this stuff want their stuff back, or they want it taken down. Is that what actually happens in that case?
It can be a variety of things. On the copyright side, it's usually someone uploads someone else's content. So maybe on a YouTube like site, maybe someone else uploads a filmmaker's film and they want it taken down. Or on we see this happen a lot where sites, maybe just find a random photo off the internet and they use that.
Yeah, I'm sure that happens all the time.
Yeah, which is not a good idea. We have a great guide on our site if you're looking for Creative Commons or openly licensed content that you can use without getting yourself into a lot of trouble. But those are primary issues. We also see on the non-copyright side, sometimes websites having to go into defensive mode. So sites like Yelp or review sites that maybe have people post negative reviews on their website are protected by a law that's called the Communications Decency Act Section 230, also known as CDA 230, which essentially provides some websites that don't edit user content, but just really serve as a platform for users. And it protects them from things like defamation and libel and other potential claims. So we often help websites walk through and see, oh, are you covered by CDA 230? Is this a situation where you can fight back? Is this a situation where you can't? Where do you fall on that spectrum? And a lot of this we do preventatively. So if there is a website that is going down this road, we like to provide advice ideally before launch, so they're really on the path to success from the beginning.
Something like a Yelp or some other site that rates companies or people, whatever, Angie's List kind of thing is what you're talking about, where they slam a doctor's office or some other business, and then the business comes after them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure that happens a lot. It's interesting. I mean, in this day and age, it's tough to. You could be a doctor's office or a hotel or a restaurant, and people slam you on the internet, and as the restaurant itself, they don't know what to do. It's like we had a couple bad customers, and they haven't even signed up or wanted to be evaluated by these things that are evaluating them. And it's almost like, how do you react? How does the business react to criticism of their product or their service, something like that? And I suppose at some point they probably have try to go after the company that's sponsoring the ability for users to do that.
They do, but again, CDA 230 typically prevents that avenue of trying to remedy the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And often the more effective remedies than things like going through litigation, going after Yelp, going after Angie's List is honestly getting back to those basic customer service principles and really trying to be the best business you can. And yes, some customers will always be upset, but if you can keep the vast majority of your customers happy, then you'll tend to have less problems and being able to respond to problems quickly when they occur.
Okay. So what other pitfalls and landmines are out there that you see, some of the other more common issues?
So some of the other more common issues that we tend to see with small businesses are often when they're handed a contract and they just sign on the dotted line and they don't really read it. We tend to see this a lot more with our creative folks, our filmmakers, our musicians, but we are starting to see it a lot more in the business world. And we always just encourage people, never sign a contract that you do not understand.
Which are most of them are difficult to understand because they're written in a legalese type of way. So I would imagine what you're getting at is have an attorney review any contract before you ever sign it.
Yes, it's a good rule of thumb, and I realize that can be really hard for small businesses that don't necessarily have the resources, but that's why organizations like New Media Rights exist. We're here to help. And if we can't help, since our attorneys are only barred in the state of California, but we do have organizations that we can refer people to if they need help, but maybe can't afford that really expensive attorney.
Well, that brings up an interesting ideas. Most attorneys are only barred in a particular state, maybe a couple states if they live near the border or reciprocity, that kind of thing. But the internet is not limited to state boundaries. So how do you deal with not only just across the United States, but everywhere, across the world, the legalities of it all?
It's definitely a constant challenge for us and a very interesting one that we really have to look at on a daily basis and figure out really on a situation by situation case of whether we can help or not. Now, there are some things like the U.S. has done, for better or for worse, a very good job of exporting its own copyright law to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So often in copyright cases, we can help international folks and folks across the U.S. a little bit more because of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. If they're within that system and need help related to that system, often we can do more to help. For contracts, it does get a little bit trickier. And what we tend to do is if there's a specific copyright provision, because copyright is pretty unique, and patent law as well, even though we don't really do patent law, is that copyright is governed by federal law and not state law, like many of the other basic laws that guide contracts and other issues that most businesses deal with on a daily basis. So we're able to step in those cases, and even if we can't review the rest of the contract, we can review that copyright provision, since a lot in contracts that involve content, often that copyright provision is the most critical provision.
Okay, yeah, now that you mention it, that makes sense. Copyrights, trademarks, and patents are at the federal level, not state level, correct?
Mostly correct. Some trademark law is actually at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
The way trademark works is there is a federal registration system and there is federal trademark law, but there is also a system of trademark law at the state level that protects things without federal registrations. And it's definitely an unusual mashup, and trademark cases are a little bit harder.
Okay. Now, does New Media Rights have a special type of financial model as opposed to just get a call on a regular attorney? You have like a membership fees or something like that, or how does the cost work for a small business?
Well, I should first emphasize that we're not a company. We are a nonprofit organization that is fiscally sponsored by California Western School of Law, but we're entirely independently funded through individual donations, grants, and then certain low cost fees. And the way our fee structure works is we have a free and then extremely nominal cost model. So folks that typically fall into our free category are maybe folks that have something that has a really high public interest value, or maybe they're folks that are just bootstrapping it and really doing all of their work with not a lot of resources, or even some of our younger entrepreneurs. We've helped entrepreneurs that are just starting out in high school and, very early college students who just don't have those financial resources. Some of the folks that fall into our nominal fee category are maybe some of the folks that have a little bit of venture capital, or maybe they're doing this on the side while they're still employed at a relatively well-paying job. But I should also emphasize that our nominal fees are still remarkably low. But we always work on a flat rate, so you'll know the cost of whatever work we're doing for you before we even start. And it's rare that a case exceeds $500.
Wow, that's outstanding. That's incredible for the startup business and the small business owner. Using one of your previous examples, if I needed some type of user agreement, copyright agreement for my basic website, I could just get a fixed price from you, and then just write you the check when it's done. And most of the time that's always going to end up being less than the $500.
Mm-hmm. We typically do require payment up front, just because we found that tracking people down afterwards can be a bit of a challenge.
Well, sir, I mean, most attorneys require at least a retainer up front, so that's not all that uncommon. No. I don't see that as an issue at all. But that's incredible. So the service you're providing, and in a very appropriate name also, New Media Rights, really fits in well with the whole mantra of protecting the small business owner and the startup in this crazy internet world that we're living in now.
Yeah, and we do even more than provide direct legal services to help support the small creator, the small startup, the average internet user. Because we are a nonprofit, we take what we learn on the ground and we turn it both into educational resources. So if we see that, we're getting a lot of inquiries about a certain issue, whether that be a certain type of copyright registration, or even whether the Wizard of Oz is in the public domain or not, we'll create an educational resource on that. And we'll also take what we learn on the ground and we'll take it to the Federal Communications Commission and the Copyright Office. These are two areas where, honestly, big money does tend to be better represented at these particular tables. So we're currently working on a net neutrality comment that really takes our experiences working with small creators and small startup businesses who are absolutely dependent on net neutrality, and really bringing that story to the FCC. On the copyright side, we're bringing the stories of remix creators, or people who take various content and mash it together to create something new. We're also taking the stories of small content creators who've had their work infringed on or taken from them and had no real recourse in our current system. Because copyright is and communications law as well, they're really informative stages right now where we're going to see some very significant changes in the next 5 years. So we're really here as that user, small creator, small entrepreneur voice, and really ensuring that those voices are represented at the table.
I mean, that's just incredible. Talk about a startup or small business having access to you guys in this vast amount of information. And a lot of the stuff that you're doing, if somebody's curious, can they just go to the website newmediarights.org? Do you have a way of searching or finding information just on your own?
Yes, on New Media Rights, we have on our website we have a variety of guides, a variety of other resources that are pretty easy to find. And then if people have specific legal inquiries, we ask that they use our contact form. I'm actually the attorney who looks at every single contact form as it comes in, and if inquiries are directed through the contact form, it makes sure I have all of the information I need to really decide on whether this is a case we can take on, whether this is a question we can answer, or whether we need to refer folks somewhere else. So that contact form is definitely the best way to get in touch with us for folks that have an actual legal question or legal problem that they need help with.
All right. Well, that's great. Terry Karabonic, I appreciate you sharing the information about New Media Rights with you. What we like to do here is help and encourage veterans or soon-to-be veterans to go into the world of entrepreneurship. And if you had any parting words or last tidbits of advice for our listeners, have at it.
I'd say, always do your due diligence. Making sure you lay the proper groundwork for your business will inevitably save you time later. And find community resources. You'd be surprised at how many resources there are for veterans out there who are making that transition from military to civilian life. We're actually, in a sense, part of a co-working center and startup accelerator right now called CyberHive that has its own program called Mil to Sil, so military to civilian, that's really taken folks from the military and helped them get into this entrepreneurship model and teach them how to translate these amazing skills that you all learned in the military and how to transition that into entrepreneurship. So programs like this exist in many cities throughout the U.S., so absolutely seek them out.
All right, Terry, that's great. It holds true to the theme of this entire podcast. There's so many resources and programs out there, most of them free to help veterans get into the world of entrepreneurship. And those incubators and places that you talk about, I've been to some of those and I've been involved in some of those, and it's almost, when you're an entrepreneur at heart and you get into one of those places and you're surrounded by other people that are working their ideas, it's almost intoxicating, and it's really a fun environment to be in. So thank you for mentioning all that.
Oh, no problem. Happy to. I mean, these are great resources, and you're doing such good work on this podcast, really ensuring that veterans know what resources are out there.
All right, Terry. Well, thanks again. And I'll be in touch with New Media Rights, I'm sure, and I'll definitely be looking around at some of the good work you guys are doing, and maybe we'll have you guys back on the show in the near future.
Thanks so much, Joe. That sounds great.
All right. Thank you for listening to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. Reviews are always greatly appreciated. So until next time, this veteran is Oscar Mike.